Good evening. My God, this is a wonderful and warm welcome. And I know many of you are here for credit, but it's always a delight to speak with other people. And so we are going to share with you the work that we've been doing. So I'm going to start by sort of contextualizing the big ideas around this project and our inspiration. So this project is sort of at the intersection of art education, creativity, and democracy. So we stand along with the educators in this country that believe that public schools have a very important role in sustaining America's democracy. And we build on the ideas of the philosopher John Dewey that in 1916 was writing about the role of a school in democracy. And he posed that education should prepare citizens to make informed, intelligent decisions that have the potential to lead to the public good. Critiques of contemporary schooling point out that is not as much a reality today, that we live in a fragmented reality, and schools have moved away somewhat from that mandate. So we would like to remind you that historically, public schools have provided immigrants like myself who arrive in the United States with a mechanism to integrate into mainstream American culture. The original educational purpose of public schools was to make it possible for students to learn the country's primary language, and I say primary because there is no official language in this country, shared values, and acquire valuable knowledge, not only academic knowledge, but practical knowledge as well. So schools function as an engine of democracy that prepare people with life and academic skills to contribute to society, perpetuating the ideology that America is a land of opportunity where people can succeed. When James and I got together to generate ideas for this project was right after the latest election for president, and we sensed that there was a lot of emerging tension in the country, but we couldn't quite expect that that tension would unfold in the way that it has. So with that, I think we will move to...
So talking about the context, obviously Flavia talked about the context in which we did this project. And it's interesting, before we got started, a student that participated in this last year is in the audience. So it'll be interesting to hear her perspective from this, the other side of the aisle. Because obviously as a teacher, I see things in a different perspective than my students, and that'll be interesting. So connecting with today's context, and unfortunately ample evidence suggests that schools have changed into mechanisms that perpetuate social divides. The walls of my classroom do not keep out the uncivil dialogue that often happens in our communities on and off the web, and that the tension and the wider public debate related to identity and issues of immigration don't stop at the doors of a school. So I asked myself, how can I, as an art teacher in my classroom, help mediate this problem? A recent report released by the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights confirms that the American public schooling remains profoundly unequal and segregated along racial and or socioeconomic lines and lags in correlation with the social advancement and opportunity. Therefore, as progressive educators, we wonder how contemporary art education can balance the increased focus on academic achievement and accountability with space for critical reflection and a commitment to civil engagement.
So in sort of asking, how can schools become a place where we can foment democracy, we looked at what were the skills that the students were bringing to the table. And I don't have to tell you, because we all know, technology plays an increasing role in our lives. So we decided to leverage the communication abilities of today's students, which are often mediated by digital technology, and ask them to use digital storytelling to express their experiences in society. So we combined James' classroom expertise with my expertise and practice as a qualitative researcher to engage in this project.
So this is the web page or a portal of that we created a website that hopefully will continue to will disseminate information and share our research and also the students' stories. It's live. It's whoisamerican.com. You can check it out. There's also a correlating YouTube website. We're anticipating that this will continue to expand and that will include new insights and additional student perspectives as they become available.
Oh. Did you go too far?
I think we both clicked at the same time.
Yeah, it's like I didn't recognize that. So our goal was to gather the stories, starting with James' cohort of students, and then expand that to other classrooms across the country, using those narratives both as an art form and having value in itself as an art form that the students can develop skill and expertise in, but also using it as data, looking at the content and the way that these stories are created to understand the realities of the students. I'm not clicking.
So our questions were, how do current high school students view American identity? It really is quite a touchy thing. In my classroom, along with many students throughout the United States, they stand and pledge the allegiance to the flag every day. And that's something to think about, is an American identity and how that relates to patriotic behavior. What does critical digital citizenship look like, and how does it play an active role in our lives? And how can art education prepare students for critical engagement as citizens?
So in order to do that work, one of the things that was important was to make explicit what we believe in. And we've been telling you this in a variety of ways so far. But we try to make that very explicit for other people who are going to become our future collaborators. So our project is grounded on 4 key values. The first one is the notion of making. And I know making, that is the maker movement. We are buying handmade things. That's a trend of sorts. But for those of us who educate with the arts, making is also a very powerful thing that humans do, is our ability to create reality, to modify reality, to bring to life things that we imagine. And it's kind of an antidote to the demands of capitalism that tells us to consume things that somebody else created for us. So that is a real importance, I think, in creating spaces where people can imagine and make things that they desire. The second value is the notion of voice, with all the transformative potential that it has, right? Because the condition of being oppressed is one of not having voice or not being heard. So in classrooms, especially when we work with young people who are figuring out who they are, being able to express what they think and they feel, what they are feeling and thinking because it's evolving, is incredibly important. So voice is another value. The third value is dialogue. And it builds upon the idea of voice, because it's more than these distinct voices coexisting in the classroom. Actually, if you are a psychology major, you may know about the evolution of speech in children, and that is this phase where it's called the collective monologue, where little kids are in playgrounds and they're all talking to themselves, not talking to each other. Sometimes I think we do a lot of that. So the idea of dialogue is really to develop the skills to express your own perspective, your voice, but also to listen and to understand and to be able to take other perspectives into account. We talked about the common good at the beginning of the talk, and without dialogue, there is no understanding of what the common good might be. And the fourth value is transformation. So if you have all those things in place, you are equipped with the potential of promoting change. You cannot promote change if you are not aware of who you are, where do you speak from, if you are not aware of the people around you, and if you don't know how to make that change. So those are the values that guide our work.
So these four values that we shared as teachers, we were hoping, and a researcher, we're hoping that the students would start to emulate and share within the digital divide or within the website, that they'd be able to have dialogues with comments and respond to each other's digital stories and their perspectives, and to have some critical thinking and dialogue there. So these are on the YouTube channel, as I said, and so we hope that they will continue to engage and that conversations can grow to people beyond those that are involved in the project.
So that is sort of the overview. Now we are going to take you into the inner workings of this project with some insights of what did this look like in the classroom. So it started with an innocent prompt, right, with a question, who is American today, which is intentionally an open-ended and vague question that can evoke a multiplicity of responses.
And the hope was that the students would go home and within their communities, within the school and beyond, start having some other conversations related to that initial question. And that they would think about this in terms of their family, school, and community. What ideas come to mind, or people come to mind, when you think about who's an American? And what do they look like? Who do they represent? And most importantly, do you represent an American today? How do you fit into that picture? So now, back up. Flavia, do you want to?
No, go ahead. We can do it together.
We can do it together. So we have three of the digital stories that my students shared, and the other ones are online. We hope you will go online and see it. But we wanted to give you three of different abilities with technique, with perspective, and different sense of voice.
Right. So they sort of represent an arc of the possibilities that we encountered in the classroom. And then later on, this is a plug, stay awake. Later on, we are going to more in-depth look at the meaning and how we analyzed each one of these stories.
Is a person who has different ethnicity. Nobody is the same. We all have a story to tell. Yes, we might not do as many things as we should in a day, or anything that we possibly could do in a day. But sometimes we're just so tired, just so much going on in our lives, that it gets harder and harder every time. An American is a person who is caring, a person who doesn't really ask for help, an independent person, a person looking for better and newer opportunities every day. My parents came to the United States 25 years ago, going back and forth from Mexico to the United States. I was born in Mexico, but raised in America. It doesn't matter where you are from or how you look. You could be an American just as everybody else. Be independent. Be the person who you are meant to be. Live your life to the fullest, because that is what an American is.
An American looks like a white cis person who hasn't had to work for their achievements. They woke up with wealth, and they will die with wealth. They're the selfish, cruel higher-ups who don't help minorities. They sit around while actual hardworking people hold up their status. You're told that cliches leave after high school, but then you're subjected to society's tiers of popularity. Everyone wants to be popular. Our government now consists of mostly people who have never been repressed, scared for their life. They don't know how it feels to be forgotten in healthcare, not able to marry, get killed because of their race. Billionaires, rich people who use their money for their advantage. They use their fame to get what they want. Diversity should be what America's actually about. However, the people who are always shown to be an American is a straight white family with their family that they raise with a Christian-based religion. If you're not that in this country, you don't fit in.
To be an American is to have a dream, and to be able to make that dream come true. We have freedom. Freedom to speak our mind, live our own lives, and fight for our beliefs. Being American is to be accepting. America is so diverse. You can walk downtown and see so many different cultures and traditions. Being an American means that we are all treated equally, no matter what color skin you have, and it doesn't matter what your culture is. At the end of the day, no matter what divides us, whether it be religion, race, gender, sexuality, we are still American.
We're fearful of disorders, and there were 5,000 uniformed non-lethal devices.
Okay. So how did we do this in my classroom? This is a simple diagram outlining the approach I took with my students. And by the way, out of curiosity, how many of you have ever done a digital story yourself? Raise your hand. Okay, a few. Yeah, I was surprised that so few students had done this, but anyway. So I constructed a way to do this in my classroom, to start from A to B, and to address that in greater, this will be addressed in greater depth tomorrow from 4 to 6 in the workshop that was shared with you, and at the end we'll have some more information if you're wanting to come and take a look at that. But we believe that critical digital making strategies such as digital storytelling can be highly responsive and adaptable to the realities and the needs of today's students, particularly those adapting to our local culture.
And did you want to plug in the workshop tomorrow?
Oh, we'll talk about that at the end.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah,
I'm jumping the gun.
You're good.
So let me just talk a little bit about the research project. The idea for this project was inspired by a program that I've seen in Europe, in Barcelona. There was a project in a variety of European Union schools where elementary school children were exploring the meaning of what does it mean to be an European citizen. And I've seen that reported several years ago, and it stayed in the back of my head because they expressed their perspectives of being a first-class European citizen or a second-class European citizen through art-making practices. And that project was inspired by the sort of political changes and shifts that were going on in Europe, which to some extent echo some of the shifts that are going on in the United States. So in order to understand what was happening in James' classroom, he was really in charge of working with the students in developing the stories. I came in as a researcher and talked to the students individually, gathered documentation from the process, reviewed writing prompts, spent time with the students, and had a sense for what their experience in doing that project was, and also probed through some of the resistance and feelings that they had in doing this project. one of the things that was a pivotal learning for me was that although the students I talked to recognized that they are avid consumers of digital media, they don't feel that digital media is something they can interact with from a creator's perspective. In fact, a lot of them question why we were doing a media project in an art classroom. It didn't seem to make sense. That belonged in another part of the curriculum. It wasn't valid art. But I think it's very interesting because the kind of digital material we consume is sophisticatedly, it's created in sophisticated ways, is pushed at us based on what we've seen before. We circulate it in sort of prescribed ways. I think that is a real important space for educators to occupy, to understand the educational potential and the political importance of really preparing students to, in a way, talk back to the way media is being pushed at us by sort of replacing students' status of mere consumers of digital content to prosumers, to people who can articulate their voice in that context as well.
So the term prosumer, if you're not familiar with it, was one that was coined probably 10 years ago, and it relates to those that not only engage in viewing digital content, but also creating. Here is a statement from the NAEA, which I'm on the board of, and I actually was part of this writing committee that wrote this, and I took an excerpt to just show you how timely this topic is for art educators and for all classrooms in reality. Digital citizenship is characterized by the use of critical thinking skills to arrive at ethical choices related to the selection, creation, curation, and dissemination of content and relationships formed on and through digital media.
So in this project, for us, the term that we've been using is this notion of critical digital citizenship, trying to figure out how we can promote that with projects such as this one. And critical digital citizenship encompasses the fact that we have these digitally aware students. They are probably more aware than their instructors. You have to grow in digital media literacy because, you know, even newspapers are creating digital content. So that is definitely the current wave in which information is being disseminated. That strategies like digital storytelling are incredibly flexible and enable people to articulate their perspectives and therefore enable us to promote true democratic dialogue. And if you are not part of digital discourse, your voice is not going to be heard. So again, the notion of voice and agency, which we've been driving throughout this presentation, and the importance that has in promoting the common good. So it's really about the relationship between creativity and social justice or democracy.
So some emerging themes that came out of this, because I'm an artist, but I'm also, as an art educator, always curious about what will happen, and not knowing ahead of time, because it's not a formulaic kind of thing that you do in the studio. It's not a craft, it's an art, and teaching can be the same. So you're not always sure what's going to emerge. The importance of digital media. Most states, as you're probably not aware of, don't really have standards related to digital media or media arts. The digital media and social media platforms are accessible. However, they're not the same. Most students see that social media and digital media are one and the same, which they're very distinct and different platforms. Spreadable media facilitates conversation, good or bad, as we can see with political turmoil that we've been in for the last year, but also can be positive. And that's what we were hoping to elicit with the response for this with this project with my students. Students consume digital media avidly, but the majority never have made films or digital stories. I was a little shocked by that. The need to, and we're continuing to look at the impact as artists, art educators, and as researchers, the impact of this medium on the use of technology in the classroom and how it impacts learning.
So a lot of these themes that James just talked about came from the interviews with the students. Those were the things that they were wondering about. But looking at the content, because when you look at the narrative of the 3 videos that you saw, you see students talking about how they feel in relationship to being an American very differently. So we were looking for a way to understand that better. And in fact, on my flight home from Utah last October, I grabbed a professional journal out of my briefcase, and I stumbled upon an article by James Banks, who is the foremost multicultural educator and an incredibly respected citizenship education scholar. And Banks was just reflecting about this sort of divided, fragmented realities in the US and in the world, and trying to talk about different positions that people occupy in relationship to how they see themselves as citizens. So he created this typology with 4 types of citizens. Failed citizen, so that's somebody who doesn't feel recognized, who doesn't feel has legal status, can't vote, so on and so forth. Recognized citizen, somebody who understands, I got to vote, I have some rights, this is how it works, I pay taxes, etc. Participatory citizen, somebody who knows what the rules of democracy are and can take an active role. At any stage of these 3 different types, you can become a transformative citizen when you feel that you can create some change in society. So I think we saw that reflected in the digital texts that the student created. They belonged to very different, to these 3 different positions, and we are going to talk to you a little bit more about where they are.
So if you remember the second example, Cameron, this was an example of the very first where they don't feel connected with they feel that they don't have a part of the dialogue, and they don't feel as they belong to this civic engagement. She voices the experience of not feeling recognized, and many people in our community feel that. His hand-drawn animated story combines the narrative of a failed citizen with an advanced digital making skills that move the viewer to carefully consider their perspective. A very powerful story and a different perspective, and certainly embodies that kind of world that many people don't feel that they have a foothold in our communities.
And there is an interesting dichotomy, if you will, between feeling that in Cameron's case, you were not a recognized citizen. On the other hand, in terms of his skills to create the digital story, he by far surpassed many of his peers. So you could wonder if that feeling of alienation perhaps didn't fuel his creative drive to create something that was more compelling than other students who just embraced this as an assignment. So, failed, recognized. So Tanya really fits the bill of a recognized citizen. The theme for her digital story was, nobody is the same, we all have a story to tell. According to 17-year-old Tanya, Americans are caring and independent and aspire for better opportunities. She positions herself as a recognized citizen. She talks about her parents coming to the United States from Mexico 25 years ago and traveling between the 2 countries. Born in Mexico and raised in the United States, she considers herself an American. Her digital story was created proficiently, utilizing primarily family images that depicted landmarks of her personal history: celebrations, graduations, sports events, family gatherings, and conveyed a sense of connection and pride. She concludes by saying that it doesn't matter where you are from or how you look. You can be an American just as everybody else. Be the person you were meant to be. So there is so much idealism and hope in a story like that, and in a student like that. I mean, they are depositing their dreams of a better life in front of us. And I think as educators, it's a challenge to see how we can help them achieve those dreams. Tanya also did something that a lot of the students discussed among themselves. They had constraints in terms of what images they could use. They couldn't just steal anything from the internet. Their teacher was kind of a stickler about that. You had to have copy permission.
Not as much as I should have been.
So they realized, some of the students realized that if they just looked at what was available on the internet, it was a limited selection. Some of them didn't find themselves represented there. So they had to gather their images for the story from other sources. So some of the students create the images themselves, like Cameron, or like Tanya, looked at their family or their life resources and generated images that way. That is a very interesting strategy that shows a level of sort of advancement in their making skills.
And the last example that we want to share with you that you already saw was Eric's, and he is a good example of participatory citizenship, where they're engaging and they sense civic responsibility to make things better and that they have a voice. His digital story is created with evocative imagery that underscores the ideas of personal effort and hard work in pursuit of one's fulfillment. From this 16-year-old's perspective, Americans are free to do or be whatever they want to be, and are diverse and equally accepted, regardless of their background. He identifies with a particularly participatory citizenship perspective that is rooted in the view of a society as inclusive to all. His digital narrative combined proficient and advanced making skills, employing powerful imagery, music, visual effects to convey the notion that the freedoms of Americans enjoy are achieved through creativity, ideals, and work. In this portion of his digital story, we hear his voice articulating these ideas. In the second portion, the story is told exclusively through moving images and music. This is a more open-ended and poetic approach and is very effective.
So we are going to wrap what we've talked about with some concluding thoughts, and then open for conversation. So one idea that we would like you to walk away with is that for us, digital storytelling is a form of critical digital making. It's a very serious, very powerful strategy that serves the purpose of providing an accessible forum for discourse on contemporary issues, ensuring that a diversity of perspectives is represented. And we believe that in all classrooms all over the world, this is part of the work that educators do, is to address contemporary issues, is not to shy away from what is happening. Because if you cannot have civil discourse in the classroom, you certainly are not going to have it anywhere else.
And this was something I was really, I conveyed, and I wasn't disappointed that students were really respectful of different perspectives. Something that we are not having in the larger context we were having within my classroom, that people could share their perspective and still be empathetic and respectful of perspectives that were very different than their own. So the second point we want you to go away with is culturally responsive teaching promotes structural inclusion because it gives students an experience of recognition and civic equality. And that's something very important. Our classrooms can sometimes be the worst places or the best places, and we want to make sure it's a safe space for students to have this inclusive experience.
Are you all taking notes? This third idea, which we think is important too, it pertains to the situation of young people. Youth are, in a way, full of potential, but they are also somewhat alienated and disenfranchised from politics because they are not defined in our society as political subjects. I think we are seeing, with the emergence of youth activism after the Parkland shooting and other events, more of that. I think young people are sort of taking to the streets and making their voices heard. But from a civic society point of view, young people are not invited to participate. So to have spaces, educational safe spaces where they are respected as members of society is a very important thing.
And as an educator, I feel it's important for teachers to find ways of establishing the relevance of politics and connecting the micropolitics of personal experience with the macropolitics of the public sphere. And that often doesn't happen. Sometimes what happens in a classroom environment is something I call schoolish. It's something that only exists within that artificial construct, and it doesn't really reflect what's going on outside the walls. And I think it's important that our schools become places where we do have these dialogues about very timely topics. So we're so appreciative that you're here. And we're hoping that you're generating some thoughts. We may have talked about some terms that you're not familiar with. I make the assumption you know what a digital story is or what the elements are of a digital story. If I'm wrong, please raise your hand so we can talk about it, because I think it's a very effective way of telling any kind of story, not just one that's politically charged.
Yeah, all
any questions.
All questions count. Yes.
Oh, go for it. You were.
Sorry, you go first.
So, your students have created these videos. What was the response? What kind of dialogues have happened in the classroom since making these and them responding to each other?
So that's a good question. What were the students' reactions?
Oh, you were repeating. Okay, good.
Yeah.
You know the
What were the students' reactions after they did this? Often I don't tell the students ahead of time exactly what we're doing or why, because I don't want to muddy the waters. I want to see what happens. I think a lot of them didn't really know why we were doing this in a studio class. I did it in my AP studio class and also in a class I do a kind of an exploration of media and ideation, something called R2 Honors in my school. I think it was varied. Flavia, you can probably address how, when you were talking to them as a third party coming in, they were probably a little more honest with you than they were with me, because I was grading them and you were not.
Well, so when I say that this is a very important space to figure out as educators, hey, as educators, as future parents, as members of society, this is a very important space to understand and occupy. It's interesting the assumptions that the students already developed about digital media. One assumption is that while they love it, they are not equipped to create anything. So to dispel that was difficult. To say that this is art, that was like, the sun has shifted. Like, really, this is art? And James showed them copious examples of artists who use digital media, but still somehow they didn't believe because they had a firmer assumption of what art is. And you can all guess what that is, something in a gold frame, in a pedestal, in a museum, you name it. So it's very interesting. If we don't somehow disturb the landscape a bit, we will have a whole generation of very digital technology dependent people who don't understand how technology works because they've never tried to create anything. It's like many of us are not painters or artists or potters, but if you ever try to throw a teacup, or if you ever held a paintbrush and tried to create an oil painting, if you ever tried to weave a tapestry, your appreciation for what goes into that making practice is completely transformed. You never look at art the same. So that's, as art educators, we love to work with future artists. Yes, it's fun, but we work with everybody. And what we want ultimately is a society of people who understand the impact of art in their lives. And digital media art needs to be understood and embraced.
So in the context of my classroom also, we've been very fortunate in the last 4 years because of my association as an Art 21 educator. We've had contemporary artists come. We had Whoop-De-Doo come to our school. If you want to look, I know Whoop-De-Doo. They're two artists. They came and did a performance and worked with 2 of my students and students from 3 other high schools to do an art performance. We had Oliver Herring has come twice. We've had Mel Chin. So I'm trying to get students to feel a little more comfortable about what they perceive as art and start to accept different, wider perspectives. That art is a process, it's an experience, it's not just something that you make, it's meaning you make through a variety of different materials.
And I don't want to answer the question for you, but I think probably in that answer, the idea of the exhibitions that you have curated, it's part of the answer of getting the idea circulating.
Do you want me to
can talk about that.
Okay. Well, something that my students do is they curate exhibits. I ran a gallery with my students for the last year and a half in the Provo Town Center, which is the Provo Mall, and it's called Artcetra. And the exhibit that we just showed, well, we showed you 3 videos, and the students' pictures have been on display there for about 3 months, and now it's just taken down and will be going to the Woodbury Museum. And so that's part of it. It's starting maybe the context. Having in a gallery or a museum may make it more artful for some of my students.
And we are hoping, as the project keeps rolling along, that other teachers will develop these digital stories with their students and they can be shared. Because sometimes you create one level of dialogue when it's the people I know in my school, but it's another level of dialogue where you can find commonalities across greater geographical distance.
You can come and ask us later if I didn't answer it is exactly like what you were looking for. Now, there was another question here.
I was really struck by the Cameron. Did this person, was he left feeling like he was totally unable to do? Did you talk to him about what he can do? Did you give him tools about how to change this feeling that he's not participating?
I think we can.
You can go for it.
So the
you may
question,
want to rephrase the question.
Yeah. So the question was about the student Cameron, who did the digital story that we had identified as a failed citizen. So I met Cameron when he was in the midst of developing the story, because I showed up in Utah last year in October, so the project wasn't done. And he was struggling, coming to class, not coming to class, involved in a variety of other groups and organizations that I think provided some support for him, but definitely angry and uncomfortable. And to a point that I thought he wasn't going to get it together to finish the project. So a month and a half later, when James sends me the finalized videos and I'm pouring myself over them, it was with just, I cannot tell you the sense of joy. It's like I knew this kid and he made it through. And I don't know if he finished the year well or not, but I know that he could feel very proud and confident that he was capable of something great. Just because I think his story is incredibly compelling. And it is at a different level, a very different level from all the other stories that were created.
And I will say, Cameron finished the year early, but I think there was closure for him in that he was able to share that perspective, and that there was a platform to do so, and that it was respected, and it was heard, and it was seen. So I think so. I mean, that's a baby step, right? And what we're talking about is having a dialogue, a place where people have a voice and can be heard. Any other questions? Yes?
So those, 3 different categories of citizenship, where did, I guess, the bulk of the students come from?
That's so good. Let me see if I remember that. So I spent my summer pouring myself over the data. So you wouldn't be surprised that the bulk of the students fall under the recognized citizenship category. But the simple fact that these high school students are enrolled in school would help with that. Because if you are totally in the fringes of society, if you don't even have the necessary documents and wherewithal to be enrolled in school, you are definitely not a recognized citizen. So that was where the majority of the students were. What was interesting too is that they had this really they had like this very sort of rote understanding of what being an American is. If we did a visual analysis of how many American flags, how many military personnel, what are other imageries? Sporting events. I mean, there were kind of these iconic images of what does it mean to be an American. So that was where the bulk of the students were. And if you think about, I mean, if you watched one music video in your life and you see the level of the production values in a music video, and you compare that with what the students were going for in their digital stories, the gap was so great, right? So they are consuming, they know that is a very sophisticated way to express ideas and feelings and emotions, and their skills are just not there. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they resist the medium.
Well, and to be fair, mine's a studio art class with a few computers. It's primarily it's not a digital making space primarily. It's a hands-on studio course. And so some of the students may not have had the opportunity to create a digital narrative with images and sound.
But they get the idea that once you do, that message is highly spreadable. It's spreadable in a way that other traditional art forms aren't. So in fact, spreadable media is the title of one of the books I was reading in order to ground the research. And one of James' students used that very expression in our interview. And I pulled the book out of my bag and I said, look, you read the book, but you helped write it. So they intuitively, they know it. There's a question there.
Right there. No, that's a great question. Have we considered doing the follow-up with these students and seeing if their perspective have changed? No, that's a great one. Since I'm not the researcher, I'm not responsible. I do it in the classroom. That's your follow-up work.
I think they probably can do that. So one of the ways we describe the project is iterative, right? So it has it evolves with our actions. We don't have it always spelled out. So the fact that these digital stories are going to live in the website, that there is a YouTube channel where people can respond, it's possible that could happen organically, that the student can go back and look at digital stories that they haven't spent time with, or look at their own digital story and say, you know, this is no longer represents what I think. But we could be more intentional in trying to track them down. As long as they are in school, it's relatively easy. I think if they are seniors and they graduate, not so much.
But there's so much to think about too, right? I mean, as the political terrain changes, so could their perspective changes that are not directly related to their experience with this project, or anyway. But a good question.
One of the things I've asked the students was, where did they get their views from? Right? Because they had to express their views and their experiences. And there were answers that were fascinating, like, well, I watch the news, I talk to people, I go to church, I do all these things. So that he had like a pretty, the network of influence was pretty broad. But there were some students who would say, well, I go to political rallies with my family, I talk to my family members, I'm not interested in what my classmates have to say. That was said to me, out cold. I have the views I have, they are the views that my family has, and I don't care. Because one of the questions was, what did you learn? Did you hear different views, and how did that change your perspective? My perspective wasn't changed. I have to say, that gave me chills. I just thought, that cannot be possible in a high school aged person. You gotta be at least curious. And actually, the farthest out, the more strange and extreme, the more curious you should be. Doesn't mean you have to go espouse that perspective, but you should be curious about it. There was no curiosity whatsoever. That came up in 2 or 3 interviews. And it caused me to pause, because I didn't, maybe naively, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, we're both idealists. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you think that there's limitations to the research data, considering it's done in Provo, Utah, which is typically sheltered?
You know, that's a good question. Is there, how valid is the research in that it's done in Provo, Utah? You know, it's interesting. In my school, we have probably 55% Latino. And I think we have some preconceived notions what Provo looks like. It's changing. I've been teaching there 26 years, and the number, the diversity along all lines have been shifting quite a lot. I think you'd be surprised. I think you were surprised a little bit about the variety and diversity that existed within my students. And ironically, you know, she spoke at BYU right after, and it was quite a bit different, the demographic that you saw in Dan Barney's class versus my class.
Well, I think it's a sort of a twofold answer. On the one hand, I think James' classroom in school is pretty representative of suburban schools in the United States with a nice diversity. Now, the project is not going to end with that data set. That was just the pilot phase. So we want to make sure some of these ideas carry to different sites. But anecdotally, in the summer, I became familiar with an organization called the Educational Video Center that's based in New York City. And their founder is Steve Goodman, who is one of the pioneers of that work in the country. And I made an appointment, and I went to talk to those guys. And we talked about a variety of things, and I talked about the project, and they were like, let me look at the website. And they looked at a few of the digital stories, and they said, yep, same issues here. Yep. So I think that is sort of, we still have regional or specificity of place, but then we also live in a networked global society where a lot of the issues are spreadable, to use the language that the students were talking about.
And if I can interject, I was invited by the government of Chile to go and speak in 2 locations in Chile in June about this research. And so it was really interesting. They saw that there was something valid in what we were exploring that they wanted to explore within their communities. So a very good question. Yes?
What fuels the passion you two have for this project as opposed to another type of project focusing on other issues, whether they're social or other?
So the question is, what has fueled this project? Well, I will tell you that Flavia and I got to know each other about 8 years ago as board members for the first time on NAE's board. And I think that it's the same thing that fuels any artist. I really do see myself as an art educator, as an artist in the classroom. I try to be, and that means I make mistakes a lot, as you can talk to any of my students, present or not. But it's about being curious. It's about having a question. When I do something in the studio, I'm trying to search out and figure out things. I try to do the same thing with my students in the classroom. Wonder if we explored this topic, what would it look like? It's just curiosity, I think, for my part.
And I think a little bit of good matchmaking and trust. So when you enter a collaboration, so we share those 4 values that we described. But when you enter a collaboration, you gotta trust your partner. It's like dancing, right? You gotta follow the steps. It's hard for me to follow, but sometimes I do it. But James is just a very gifted, caring educator, and he has been involved with digital storytelling for a long time. He has gone to training. Did you go to Oakland? Did you go to Denver?
I've gone to Berkeley, and this last summer I was in the National Gallery of Art working with the Story Center again. If you take a look online, there's a lot of digital stories that they produce, and they also give you some context to how you can produce your own. But yeah.
So he has been doing this. He's a great teacher. He's been doing this work. He's a person I like. We get along well. And I am a researcher who loves the qualitative, interpretive work, but I also want to be in classrooms. And it's not feasible for me to be in classrooms and do research and do my job. So that partnership we led with the skills that James had and a hunch that he had for doing that kind of work. And I think we stumbled on something that was much greater than we anticipated.
Well, and honestly, we started this dialogue before curtain changes that had happened in D.C. that we were just talking about this before things had changed. But apparently we're done.
Okay.
And I thought I would just put a plug one more time. Tomorrow we'll be doing a workshop, more hands-on, how do you create a digital story, along with other things about embracing social justice issues. And you can get more information right over here afterwards. But we're so appreciative of your time and your great questions. And we'll be here afterwards if you have additional questions, concerns, or anything you want to share with us. I don't know about concerns. I don't know why I said that. But
well, they may have
they
concerns.
might have concerns.
We would listen to your concerns.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Listen.
You were a fabulous
Thank you very
audience.
much.